Hi, this is the lecture on Presocratic Philosophy for Foundations of the American Experience. This is an important lecture. This is material that will be relevant to our discussions for the rest of the semester. So it's important that you understand this material. If any of it's unclear to you, you should come to me and ask, let me clarify it. It's great for you to take time at the beginning of class, raise your hand, ask about anything that wasn't clear. Again, this is material that we're going to refer back to again all semester, so it's important that you have it clear in your mind, all right? The lecture is on Presocratic philosophy. And as the name implies, Presocratic philosophy is philosophy before Socrates. Now, it's pre-Socratic in a temporal sense, meaning that it's philosophy that comes before Socrates in time, although it overlaps with his life. But pre-Socratic philosophy is also pre-Socratic in that, logically, you have to have pre-Socratic philosophy before you have Socratic philosophy. All right. Presocratic philosophy emerges around 600 to 400 BC. And it's an attempt to find universal principles that would explain the whole of nature, nature in its entirety, from the quality and the origin of basic components to man's place in the universe. And as I said, it overlaps with Socrates' life. And it constitutes a revolution in human thinking. It's the first philosophy. So before pre-Socratic philosophy, there had been no philosophy. Now, obviously, there had been civilization before pre-Socratic philosophy. There was architecture, there was astronomy, there was theology. The pyramids, of course, well, I say of course, the pyramids are much more ancient than pre-Socratic philosophy. Pre-Socratic philosophy begins around 600 BC. Pre-Socratic philosophy is happening approximately 600 to 400 BC. The pyramids were already a couple of thousand years old at the time of pre-Socratic philosophy. So before you have philosophy, you could have architecture. The Egyptians had the pyramids, of course. You could have astronomy. The Babylonians were great astronomers. But you don't have philosophy until you have pre-Socratic philosophy. So it's a revolution in human thinking. And it's followed very quickly afterwards by a second revolution, which is Socratic philosophy. Socrates rejects the philosophy of the pre-Socratics. So what you have happening in ancient Greece in a very short period of time are two intellectual revolutions: pre-Socratic philosophy and then Socratic philosophy, which is a rejection of pre-Socratic philosophy. Okay? Philosophy in general, well, pre-Socratic philosophy is revolutionary and unusual because it's an attempt to find natural explanations for phenomena in nature. Now, other people before the pre-Socratics had already been good students of nature. The Egyptians, for example, were experts at predicting the stages of the Nile. It was crucial for Egyptian agriculture that the people in Egypt be able to know when the river would flood. And so the Egyptians could explain that very well with great accuracy. But if you asked them why the river flooded, they would have explained it in terms of the river god. The river floods because of the river god, making the river flood. Pre-Socratic philosophy is an attempt to explain natural phenomena in purely natural terms. Now, Socrates rejects pre-Socratic philosophy because he thinks it's focused on the wrong thing. Socrates thinks that we shouldn't be concerned with physical nature, the nature outside us. Socrates thinks that the proper object of philosophical study or inquiry is human nature. That is, what is the purpose and the end of human life? What's human life designed for? What are our lives supposed to be directed toward? So for Socrates, the pre-Socratics are making the mistake of studying the wrong thing. Nevertheless, in our discussions, I think you'll find, as we read Plato, you'll find elements of pre-Socratic philosophy again and again in Socrates' thinking. And we'll talk about specifically which pre-Socratics influence him the most. All right. To have pre-Socratic philosophy, or to have philosophy in general, I would say you have to make a string of assumptions. The first assumption you have to make is that nature is orderly and regular even when it seems to be chaotic. Now, is this necessarily true? Is it true that nature is orderly and regular? Well, maybe not. Maybe nature is chaotic. The only problem is, if nature is chaotic, then there are no patterns for us to study. There are no laws for philosophy to uncover. So even though nature might be chaotic, you have to assume that it's orderly and regular if you're going to embark on the project of philosophy, if you're going to attempt philosophy. That's the first assumption. The second assumption you have to make is that the order of nature is universal. That is, that you find the same order, the same patterns of order, the same laws of order at all places in the universe. Now, is this necessarily true? No, it's conceivable that we would live in an orderly universe, but the order in China or India would be different than the order in Michigan, or the order on Earth would be different somehow than the order in another galaxy. Now, that may be true, but you have to assume that the order is universal if you're going to have philosophy, because philosophy is an attempt to find universal laws, to tease out universal laws in nature. The third assumption you have to make is that after you assume that there's a natural order, and after you assume that it's universal, you have to assume that it is discoverable by human inquiry, that it's accessible to us. Now again, is this necessarily true? No, it might be false. Maybe there is an order in nature, and maybe it's the same thing in all places in the universe, but maybe the human mind isn't designed to ever grasp it. That could be. But you have to assume that our mind is designed to grasp it if you're going to embark on philosophy. If the mind's not designed to grasp it, then we might as well quit and just go home without even attempting to engage in philosophy. The fourth assumption you have to make, after you've assumed that the universe is orderly, and that the order is the same thing in all parts of the universe, and that whatever this universal order is accessible to the human mind, you have to make the fourth assumption that the relevant faculty of the mind is reason. Now, is this necessarily true? No. Maybe all three of the first three assumptions are true. Maybe the universe is orderly. Maybe it's the same order in all places, and maybe, in fact, it's accessible to human inquiry. But maybe the mode of learning is divine revelation. Maybe we learn about the order of the universe when God chooses one of us as a prophet and speaks through his prophet. And if that's the truth, then all we have to do is sit and wait for a prophet to appear and begin revealing the laws of God. And maybe that is in fact the situation. Maybe that's the truth. But if you assume that's the truth, then you're not going to embark in philosophy. To embark in philosophy, you have to assume that reason is the faculty. And it's just waiting for you to activate it and start venturing out and exploring the world. And if the relevant faculty is reason, then we all get to be players. We all get to engage in philosophy. All right. So we've established that philosophy is not the beginning of civilization, that there were already highly developed disciplines like astronomy, agriculture, the study of the seasons. All of these things were well underway before we had philosophy. So philosophy represents a revolution in human thought. It is an alternative to myth and to religion. It replaces theological explanations for natural phenomena. If the volcano erupts, it's not because of the volcano god. The Presocratics assume that the explanation is to be found within the volcano itself. Now, why does it happen? If this is a revolution in human history, why does it happen, where it happens, and why does it happen when it happens? I'm going to switch to the whiteboard to talk about this. Okay. Just be patient with me for a second. There's 1 second more. And let's see, this is kind of rough. But I hope you recognize this as, in sort of rough outlines, a map of the Mediterranean. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. You can always orient yourself on a European map with the distinctive Italian peninsula. The peninsula that looks, of course, like a boot. So I hope you know this, of course, is Italy. This would be the Iberian Peninsula, which today is covered with Spain and Portugal. This, of course, is the continent of Africa. Here's Asia. Here's the Black Sea. If this is the Iberian Peninsula, this is the Italian Peninsula, this is the Balkans. And this is Greece. And Greece is where the pre-Socratic revolution begins. Now, modern-day Greece covers approximately this portion of the mainland and Crete and the islands of the Aegean. In the ancient world, Greece was considerably larger. In the ancient world, the Greeks were spread across what is today the western coast of Turkey, this portion of what is today Libya, southern Italy, and even portions of southern France. And the pre-Socratic revolution begins in Greece, especially in the cities along this coast, what is today Turkey. Cities, ancient cities such as Miletus. And the Greeks were surrounded by other ancient civilizations. In North Africa, Carthage. In Europe, the Celts. Ancient Egypt. Here in Mesopotamia, you had the Assyrians. You had the Sumerians. The Babylonians. The Etruscans in Italy. And so you see, the Greeks are at something like the epicenter of the ancient world. They're surrounded by other civilizations. And because Greece is well situated on the oceans, between the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, etc., this is the crossroads of the ancient world. Now, imagine you were alive in Greece. Let's say you were living in Miletus in 600 BC. You're living in Miletus in 600 BC, and you have grown up following the old-time religion, worshiping the gods of your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. You worship Zeus, you worship Athena. But Miletus is a cosmopolitan port. And from time to time, ships come in from Egypt. And when ships come in from Egypt, you go down and you see the merchants, the exotic merchants from far away, and you learn that they worship a god with the head of a dog. Or from time to time, a ship comes in from Carthage. And the Carthaginians worship a god called Baal. The worship of Baal is very unusual. Baal is usually depicted in Carthage as a god with 2 outstretched arms. And his arms are outstretched over a fire. And the Carthaginians take their firstborn child and place it on the arms of the god, and it rolls into the fire. So the Carthaginians sacrifice their firstborn to god Baal. From time to time, caravans would come in from from Asia, with people with still stranger beliefs. So if you were growing up in Greece, in the cosmopolitan port cities of Greece, you couldn't help but notice that different people from different places had different religious beliefs. And that they all were equally sure in the correctness of their own beliefs. Now, would this automatically undermine your belief in Zeus? Not automatically, but maybe it would have that tendency. Maybe it would have a tendency toward relativism. Maybe it would occur to you that the Carthaginians, the Celts, the Egyptians, the Assyrians couldn't all be right. And it maybe would cause you to doubt all their beliefs and your own as well. Now, do we know that this is the truth? Do we know that this is what happened? Do we know that Greece's geographical position caused the Greeks to be exposed to many different beliefs, and that had the effect of undermining their own religious beliefs? No, we don't know it. But in my opinion, it's one of the more plausible explanations that would try to account for why pre-Socratic philosophy happens at this time and in this place. At any rate, whatever the cause, something revolutionary happens in ancient Greece starting around 600 BC. Now, I want to talk about the most important individuals in the pre-Socratic movement. Right? The first of these is Thales. Thales of Miletus. And Thales lives around circa 585 BC. Now, circa means, of course, approximately. Later in life, if you become a collector of antiques, if you buy a table that was made circa 1720, it doesn't mean it was made in 1720. It means we don't know when it was made, but it was made about 1720. So we don't know the exact date of Thales' life, but we know he lived around 585 BC. And Thales was searching for universal descriptions, as we explained is the project of philosophy. Now, if you were the first philosopher, if you were the first one to try to come up with non-religious explanations for the natural world, of course the challenge you face would be enormous. So I want you to think about what's the problem or the difficulty that you would have to first focus on. If you're the first person to say, I want to explain how the natural world works, without any reference to gods of the underworld, or sky gods, or Zeus, or Hera, or Athena, what's the first problem then you have to account for? Well, Thales thought the first problem was the apparent incredible diversity of the world, the incredible complexity, the incredible variety. I mean, there are all kinds of trees, all kinds of leaves, all kinds of soils, all kinds of plants, all kinds of weather. And so what he assumed was that given the incredible, apparently infinite variety of the world, all the variety must originally have emerged from singularity, from a singular substance, from one homogeneous substance. And that the variety then had come through a process of segregation, of portions, parts of this original unity breaking off into different size clumps, if you will. Okay? Now, one thing I should tell you about the pre-Socratics is that we have none of their writings intact. No complete work that they wrote has come down to us undamaged. All we have are fragments. And much of what we know about them comes from the writings of people who didn't like them, like Plato. So much of what we know about them is information provided by their enemies, which means we always have to wonder if it's distorted. But there are a few fragments that come from their works. One of the fragments from Thales is the statement, everything is full of gods. Everything is full of gods. Now, since we have to take this out of context, the larger context, the book it came from, has been destroyed, we speculate on what he must have meant by this statement. Okay? Well, think about it. Think about what he might have meant by everything is full of gods. You could take this at face value and say he follows the old-time religion. He thinks that the gods are everywhere and are causing everything that happens in the world, everything that happens in the universe. But I would suggest that he meant something different, that if causal explanations have always been provided in terms of the gods, if causality has always been understood in terms of what gods do, then saying everything is full of gods means that causal explanations are in things themselves. So in other words, if gods are synonymous with causality, so causality is to be sought within the things themselves. If you want to know why the tree buds in the spring when it buds, and why it always follows the same sequence of bud to leaf to flower to fruit, Thales seems to be saying, study the tree. Study the tree. The cause is in the tree and nowhere else. Now, Thales has one foot in this new way of thinking and one foot in the old way of thinking. He straddles, if you will, the old traditional world and something new. And so we find elements of the ancient thinking in Thales' writings. We know, for example, that Thales thought that the earth floats on water, which is an ancient Egyptian belief. So you see, he's not able to entirely extricate himself from the conventional way of thinking. Probably no one ever is. Probably every great thinker in history is himself a kind of hybrid, a kind of synthesis of the old and traditional and something entirely new. The next one of the Presocratics I want you to know is Anaximander, who is a younger contemporary of Thales, meaning his life overlaps Thales, although he's younger. And Anaximander is very impressed with Thales' insight, and decides that he'll take this thought and run with it. And so what Anaximander wants to do is to come up with orderly categories in which to organize the variety in the universe, the variety in the world that has come through the process of segregation, has emerged through the process of segregation described by Thales. And Anaximander comes up with the very influential theory of the primary opposites. The primary opposites, and there are 4 of them. Anaximander says everything in the universe is either hot or cold, dry or wet. Everything is hot or cold and dry or wet. Now this might seem ludicrously simple to you or basic, but I would say this is ingenious, because what he's doing is he's beginning the basic work of arranging taxonomies, categories in nature, organizing again the variety in the world. Okay. His work is picked up by Empedocles. Empedocles we know a little bit more about. Empedocles lives from 490 to 430 BC. Empedocles takes the theory of the 4 primary opposites and develops it into the very influential theory of the 4 elements. The 4 elements are, as I suppose you know, fire, earth, air, and water. Fire, earth, air, and water. So Empedocles says all of the universe is composed of these 4 elements. Now, each of the elements combines 2 of the 4 primary opposites. The element of fire is hot and dry. The element of air is hot and wet. The element of earth is cold and dry, and the element of water is cold and wet. And these 4 elements are indestructible. They are the components of everything that exists. This is the first articulation of a theory of the elements in history. It says that everything in nature occurs from combinations of particles of the 4 indestructible elements. According to Empedocles, then, death is not the destruction of the elements, it's simply their dispersion. So the elements that make up your body when you die will not disappear, they simply will separate out and fly out into the universe, presumably to then enter into different combinations elsewhere at other times. Empedocles says that in addition to the 4 elements, there are 2 primary forces in the universe, love and strife. Love is the force that unites. Strife is the force that divides. All right? And strife, he says, he says that since all of everything in nature is made up of the 4 primary elements under the influence of the 2 basic forces, that means everything in the universe, all of life is kindred. All of life is kin. Man and animal are kin. And he thinks that strife is prevailing in the universe because of an act of original sin. Now, I suppose that most of you know the story in the book of Genesis of the act of original sin. And in Genesis, the act of original sin committed by Adam and Eve is an act of eating forbidden food. And the forbidden food is, of course, the fruit from the tree of knowledge, which God forbade them to eat. Now, according to Empedocles, the fall of man was an act of eating forbidden food. And given what I've told you of his beliefs, what do you suppose the forbidden food was that humans ate? It was meat. It was eating animals, because when we ate animals, we ate our kin. All right? So according to Empedocles, this is why strife is prevailing in the universe and things aren't going so well. Now, to me, this raises immediate questions. Why would it be okay to eat plants if all of life is kin? It seems as if that would also be cannibalism. I don't know the answer. But for whatever reason, Empedocles thought that clearly we weren't supposed to eat meat, and when we did that, things started to go awry in the universe. The next important pre-Socratic, and perhaps the most important, and I suppose for many of you, perhaps the only one you've heard of already before you came to this class, is Pythagoras. Pythagoras, who lives circa 570 to 490 BC. Okay, and I'm going to move over back to the whiteboard to make a point about the life of Pythagoras. Pythagoras is born in Greece. But in the course of his life, he moves to the Greek colonies in southern Italy. All right? He moves to the Greek colonies in southern Italy, and that is, of course, a move from east to west. And so with that move, we began to distinguish between two different schools of pre-Socratic thought. The older original Eastern school of pre-Socratic thought and the Western school. Now, when I say school, I don't necessarily mean a physical school building. School also is used, the word school is also used to mean how shall I put it? A pattern of thought, or a school is used to describe a group of people who are engaged cooperatively in a similar philosophical pursuit. So we begin to speak now of the Pythagorean school, or more generally, the newer Western school of pre-Socratic thought. And again, that begins with Pythagoras. And Pythagoras is going to shift the focus for much of pre-Socratic thinking. He's going to shift it from a focus on matter to a focus on form. So the original pre-Socratics were concerned with matter, with physical matter, with the physical universe, things, solid things. And you study solid things, you study the physical universe through the senses, right? So the way you know about trees, the way you know about animals is through seeing them, through touching them, through tasting them, through smelling them. Pythagoras has a different interest, a different focus. He's interested in form, not so much in matter. Now, the thing you know about Pythagoras, of course, is the Pythagorean theorem, which is x squared plus y squared equals z squared, I think. Basically, that the square of the two sides of a right triangle equal the square of the hypotenuse. Now think about that. Does the Pythagorean theorem describe a right triangle made of cheese or of wood? Well, clearly it doesn't matter what the right triangle is made of. It describes any right triangle. In fact, it doesn't describe a physical right triangle at all. It describes an abstraction, a perfect right triangle, and of course, no physical right triangle, no model of a right triangle could ever be perfect. So the Pythagorean theorem describes an abstraction in the mind. So it is an observation about the form of a right triangle, not the substance of a right triangle. This reveals the essence of the new Western school of pre-Socratic thought. It's going to shift focus to form. Now, does that mean the Eastern school goes out of business? No. What it means is we've had pre-Socratic thought diverge now onto two paths that will run parallel. You'll have one group who rely on the senses to study physical nature. You'll have another group whose interest is in the more abstract, intellectual, mathematical exploration of nature, using reason instead of the senses. Pythagoras was probably inspired by developments in his day, developments in music theory, especially developments on the lyre. And you know, the lyre, L-Y-R-E, is a small harp. And the Greeks in Pythagoras' day were figuring out that music that was pleasant to listen to was pleasant for reasons that could be described, for reasons that in fact could be articulated in regular laws, especially in terms of intervals on the strings. Now, those of you who have studied music, of course, have learned scales, arpeggios, you understand key signatures. You understand that we can structure music in order to sound pleasing. And this was being discovered by musicians in Pythagoras' day, and this impressed Pythagoras, and Pythagoras therefore said that the universe is a harmonia. The universe is a harmonia, meaning it's a harmonious place, a place of balance, a place of regularity. He also said that he's also the first one to coin the term philosophia. And he thought of philosophia as a brotherhood dedicated to learning. It had strong religious and political implications that I'm not going to get into, but it's important to understand that Pythagoras is interested in the study of nature through the intellect, through reason. He thinks that nature ultimately is described mathematically. The model is music, and his idea is that the universe is a harmonia. Now, this is a very influential idea that will come up again and again in Western history. If we were to fast forward 2,000 years to the scientific revolution, for example, Johannes Kepler, who we will talk about later in the course, actually thought that the planets played musical tunes as they went around the sun. And he thought the musical tune they played was revealing of the character of that planet. He thought the Earth played a two-note tune. Kepler thought that the Earth played a tune that went famine, famine, as it went around the sun, because he thought that the Earth was a place of suffering, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the idea of the universe as a harmonia is very influential. Pythagoras has a great opponent. His opponent is Heraclitus. Heraclitus lives about 500 BC. And Heraclitus says, what could be more obviously wrong than Pythagoras' idea that the universe is a harmonia? Heraclitus says, just open your eyes, just look around you. It's clear that the universe, in fact, is full of tension and conflict. Strife and opposition are everywhere, according to Heraclitus. In fact, Heraclitus says that if it weren't for the tension between opposites, the universe would collapse. The universe is held together by this sort of dialectical tension. And governing it all is what Heraclitus calls the Logos. Now, those of you who are Christian will recognize Logos as one of the words that Christ used to describe himself centuries later. Logos is simply the Greek word for the Word. But Heraclitus says that there is a governing principle in the universe that holds together this chaotic, tense, conflicting mass. And if it weren't for the Logos, all that power, all that tension would fly apart. And according to Heraclitus, sometimes the Logos actually manifests itself physically, and when it does, it appears as fire. So the Logos is the principle, the ordering principle that holds together this conflict-ridden universe. And just as we have a famous fragment from Thales, everything is full of gods, we have a famous fragment from Heraclitus. Heraclitus, we know, said that you cannot step into the same river twice. You cannot step into the same river twice. Now think about that. Why is that true? I grew up on the Ohio River. I stepped into it certainly more than twice, swam in it many times. Well, the point is, at every moment, fish are dying, fish are being born, somewhere on the river a tree is falling in, water is evaporating. The river is not a stable thing. It's in constant flux. It's constantly changing, so it's not the same river from moment to moment. Okay? It's not the same river, meaning that what is real in the universe is change. The thing that's real is constant change, not what Pythagoras had told us, constancy and permanence. The Pythagorean theorem, after all, the Pythagorean theorem is the same today as it was yesterday and will be the same tomorrow, because Pythagoras would say a right triangle is the same thing today as it was 100 years ago. Heraclitus says, no, what's real in the universe is the tension, the conflict. Okay, Alex, can I pause? Okay. Okay, just give me, in that case, give me just a few seconds. Let's pause. If you want to get a drink of water, get up and get a drink of water. That's okay. I'm fine, thanks. Okay, that's fine. Everyone back from getting their drink? Okay, Pythagoras had an important opponent, Heraclitus. Pythagoras also found an important defender. And his defender is Parmenides. And Parmenides founds the school that we call the Eleatic school of Presocratic thought. It takes its name from the city of Elea in southern Italy. All right, and southern Italy is, of course, where Pythagoras had moved when he left Greece. So Parmenides is in the Greek colony of Elea in southern Italy, founding the Eleatic school of Presocratic philosophy. And he is defending Pythagoras against Heraclitus' attack. Parmenides and the Eleatics are the first philosophers to prefer deductive reasoning to the evidence of the senses. Parmenides and the Eleatics say that truth must be that which is universal and unchanging. Okay? Now, they arrive at this through a curious chain of thought. They would say that Parmenides and the Eleatics would say that if you are walking around with a notion of truth, if you believe that there is such a thing as truth, you must think that truth is universal and unchanging. I mean, you can't believe that what is true in Michigan is untrue in Indiana. Truth is truth, no matter where you are. And what's true today must be true tomorrow. Otherwise, it's not truth. If it changes, if the thing is changeable, then it's something other than what we mean when we speak of truth. And furthermore, since truth is the same thing at all times and all places, truth is one. It is one. It is a single thing. If it's universal and unchanging, and if it is one, it cannot have parts. If the truth had parts, then there would be partial truths. And partial truth would be the same thing as an imperfect truth or an untruth. So, for example, let's say that this circle represents the truth. I can't portion out a part of this. It can't be divided. It can't be cut. Because if I were to claim that this were the truth, it would only be a part of the truth. It would be a partial truth. And furthermore, how would I have cut the truth? What would the line of cutting, represent? If this were a cake, if I were trying to cut a cake, the lines where I sliced it would consist of something other than cake. Maybe it would consist of knife or air. But the line itself cannot be cake. If it's cake, the cake hasn't been cut. Similarly, the lines here could not be truth, because if it were truth, the truth would not be divided. So according to Parmenides, truth is universal, it is singular, and it cannot have parts, it cannot be divided. All right? This means, in the most extreme form of this theory, it means that the universe does not have parts, because whatever truth is, that which is true has to encompass that which exists. I mean, these papers have to be part of the universal truth, right? Well, logically, Parmenides has shown that the truth cannot have parts. And Parmenides' students in the Eleatic school will take this to some interesting logical extremes. especially Zeno. Zeno is Parmenides' student, Zeno of Elea. And Zeno comes up with the famous paradoxes of motion. Now, watch this. Here's my pen. Let's see if I can do this without making a mess of it, okay? Trying to get on camera now. So, I dropped the pen. Zeno says that never happened. Zeno says that cannot have happened. Zeno says that for the pen to have dropped, the room has to have parts. It has to have a part here where the pen hovers. It has to have a part here where the pen lands. So logically, this cannot have occurred. Now, this seems absurd. It seems absurd, but it's not absurd. Zeno says, if you think the pen actually fell through the air onto the paper, the mistake you have made is that you have believed your eyes. You have believed your senses. You have trusted the senses over your reason. Your reason already told you that the truth cannot have parts. And since it can't have parts, the pen cannot travel from one part of the room to another part of the room. Now, he came up with many paradoxes of motion. One of the most famous is Achilles and the tortoise. You all remember Achilles from the Iliad. Achilles is the great Greek hero in the war against Troy. Zeno said, imagine there's going to be a race between Achilles and a tortoise. Okay? Now, to make it fair, just to make it fair, we're going to give the tortoise, who is slower, a head start. We're going to say that Achilles cannot leave the starting blocks until the tortoise is halfway down the course. All right? Now, Zeno asks you, do you agree? Do you agree that in order to win the race, Achilles must pass the tortoise and reach the finish line? Yes, we agree with that. Do you agree that before he passes the tortoise, he has to catch the tortoise? Yes, he does. Do you agree that before he catches the tortoise, he will have to cover half the distance from the starting blocks to the tortoise? Yes, he will have to cover half the distance. Before he does that, do you agree he will have to cover a quarter of the distance? Yes. An eighth, a 16th, a 32nd, a 64th, 128th. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, yes, to infinity. In fact, Zeno says the distances that Achilles will have to cover are infinite. And logically, he will not even be able to leave the starting blocks. So your idea that Achilles can move does not stand up under logical scrutiny. So you must abandon one of two things, according to Zeno. Either give up your belief in motion or give up your belief in truth. You can't have both. And Zeno recommends that you give up your belief in motion because it's dependent on the senses. This is really an extreme example of the disagreement between the Western and Eastern schools of pre-Socratic thought. All right? Again, the newer Western school focuses on form. Now, I might ask you, is it possible for a blind man to understand the Pythagorean theorem? Yes, of course. You don't need your eyes. You don't need to actually have seen a drawing of a right triangle to understand the concept. Well, all you need is reason, the intellect. And this is what Zeno and Parmenides and the pre-Socratics in the West are going to focus on. You can see that Zeno, by persuading people, trying to persuade people audaciously that they should ignore their senses, he really has posed a radical and fascinating challenge. And there's a group of pre-Socratics who pick up the gauntlet, who accept the challenge, the atomists. And the atomists are going to try to come up with an explanation for how motion can occur in a universe where truth prevails and is indivisible. The most important of the atomists are Leucippus, who lives about 430 BC, and Democritus. who lives about 460 BC. The atomists are the first people to assert the existence of a genuinely empty space. Now, it's a huge intellectual challenge to try to conceive of empty space. If you try to conceive of space that contains nothing, then how can that space be a something? How can it exist? A space in which there is nothing would seem to be the same thing as nothing, which is the same thing as non-existing. It's not there. So it's very counterintuitive to try to think of a thing that is something even as it is nothing. But the atomists say, and Empedocles was right, the universe does consist of indestructible basic particles, 4 of them, fire, earth, air, and water, but they move through empty space. All right? So this allows the atomists to have it both ways. It lets them have motion and it lets them have truth. It's just truth, the universe, must now contain, along with the physical elements, it must contain empty space. Now, the atomists also think that these elements clump together in lumps of different size and therefore of different weight, and that the heavier clumps are always falling toward the center of the universe, and the lighter pieces are being spewed out to the edge in a sort of whirlpool. And so the universe is an orderly whirlpool with heavier pieces falling in, lighter pieces falling out. Okay? In fact, actually, I've made a mistake. The atomists modify Empedocles. The Empedocles would have said that there are 4 types of elements in the universe. The atomists say there's 1. There's only one kind of substance, and it is qualitatively homogeneous. The difference you get qualitatively in nature comes from the different size clumpings of this one type of element. So again, sorry for the confusion, it's my fault, but there are 2 different concepts. Empedocles, who says there are 4 kinds of elements, the atomists who say there's 1. But for the atomists, you get the variety from the different size of the clumps of those atoms. Now, at this point, notice that one of the defining features of philosophy, and this is one of the defining features of Western civilization, is the disputatiousness of it. What you have in Western thought from its origins, from the beginning, is the emergence of rival philosophical schools. And again, by school, I mean cooperative groups of people who are of a like mind. So you have Eastern and the Western tradition, and once they branch off, there's no reconciling of them. And neither one of them wins a decisive victory in the ongoing philosophical debate. In fact, I would say that one thing that's distinctive about Western civilization is this tendency toward debate and conflict. It's like different poles on a battery generating sparks. So our civilization, Western civilization, the civilization that originates with Europe, is disputatious, full of conflict, but very dynamic and intellectually always generating innovation. Now, there's one more group, very important, I want to talk about. One more group of Presocratics, and that's the Sophists. You might, even if you aren't familiar with this word, sophist, I know you're familiar with sophisticated. You might even have heard of sophistry, or you might have heard a person called a sophist. In our modern language, sophistry, the basic meaning of sophistry is slick talk. So a sophist is someone who's good at persuading people to do things, even if what he persuades them to do is questionable. A used car salesman, a politician, these are sophists. And the sophists in ancient Greece were the masters of persuasion. Masters of persuasion or of rhetoric. Rhetoric has a, I'm sure you're familiar with that word. I'm sure you think of rhetoric as being inflated or specialized speech, formalized speech. It has a more precise definition, which I would like for you to get. this will come up again throughout the semester. The technical definition of rhetoric is the study of the available means of persuasion. The study of the available means of persuasion. Now, what do I mean by the available means of persuasion? What I mean by that is a speaker who would persuade a group to do something must modify the speech they will use to suit the audience. Your speech must suit the audience. And so the available means of persuasion are the things that can be said to a specific audience to sway them the way you want them to be swayed. Okay? So let me use an example. Let's say that this winter, I'm going to try to persuade you not to wear your coats. Don't wear your coats this winter. Come on campus without them. Now, I'll have my work cut out for me because you will want your coat. It will be very difficult for me to persuade you not to wear your coats this winter. Well, how can I accomplish that? In order to have any chance at all, I have to know the available means of persuasion. What's available to me in order to accomplish this rather difficult task? Well, what do I know about you? I know that most of you are 18, 19, 20 years old. You're new at the university. I believe that most of you are unmarried. Is there anything that I know about people who are 18, 19, and 20 years old who are unmarried? Well, in general, I believe that people who fit that description want to date. And in general, I believe they want to date the person of their choice. So with that information, maybe I can use that information to persuade you not to wear your coat this winter. Suppose I were to give a speech, I were to say, don't wear your coat this winter. Instead of wearing your coat, donate it to charity. And you will then be noticed on campus. You'll be noticed as the person who runs from building to building with their arms clasped about them, shivering. And people will say, why can't that dude wear a coat? And it'll be explained to them, oh, he or she doesn't wear the coat because they donated it to the Red Cross. And word will get around that you are a philanthropic, generous person. And the person who you wish to date, when they hear of this, will form a higher opinion of you. Okay, now, I don't know if I would have actually persuaded any of you with that to leave your coat at home, but I think I made some progress. It's not entirely ludicrous. On the other hand, suppose I go to the nursing home, and I tell the people who live in the nursing home, don't wear your coat this winter, give it to charity, and then the person you wish to date will come to know that you are a generous, philanthropic person. Well, that speech is not going to be as effective at the nursing home as it was when I spoke to you in my class. On the other hand, suppose I come to you and I say, don't wear your coat this winter. Because if you are wearing your coat when you roll out of bed at night and hit the floor, the attendants will have a harder time putting you back in bed if you're wearing that cumbersome coat. Well, that's not going to work because you don't have attendants at home and you don't fall out of bed. But I might make that speech at the nursing home and actually maybe make some progress toward persuading them not to wear the coat. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is rhetoric is the study of the available means of persuasion. You have to study your audience before you speak to them, and you have to tell them what they want to hear. If you don't tell them what they want to hear, you will either bore them or you will anger them. And if you do either, if you bore them or if you anger them, they will tune out. They will tune out and your speech will fail. So, rhetoric is the study of the available means of persuasion, and the sophists are the masters of rhetoric. And the sophists are the enemies of Socrates. So the sophists, you can see the sophists fit into the Presocratic tradition because, like the Presocratics, the sophists are trying to come up with the rules that explain nature, or part of nature. Specifically, the sophists are looking for the rules that explain why persuasion succeeds when it does succeed. So they're systematically studying persuasion, just the way Pythagoras is systematically studying geometry, just the way the Eastern Presocratics are systematically studying physical nature. Now, Socrates says that sophistry is evil, because Socrates says we should not be in the business of telling people what they want to hear. We should be in the business of telling people what they need to hear. If I could use an analogy, of course, would not have been available to Socrates. It's as if Socrates is saying that the sophists give the cancer patient chocolate cake. Chocolate cake is certainly more pleasant than chemotherapy, but it's not what the cancer patient needs. Socrates says that philosophy ought to be giving people what they need, even if it's not what they want, even if it's unpleasant, all right? This also means that people don't know what's good for them. The philosopher knows. So you're going to find, I believe, as you read Plato and you see Socrates in action, you're going to see that Plato and Socrates think that the truth is not necessarily popular, and the truth is not necessarily recognized by most people. All right? Okay, that finishes this lecture. I'll elaborate on this in class, and I'll look forward to taking your questions. If you have questions, please be sure to come to me with them. Thank you.